The Dark Tower series stands at the very centre of Stephen King's literary universe, kind of weaving together elements of the Western genre, fantasy, horror, science fiction, into this sprawling epic that spans multiple dimensions and genres. I think one of the most interesting aspects of the Dark Tower series is how it's interwoven with so many of Stephen King's other standalone novels. So throughout the series, you're going to encounter characters and abilities that cross over from King's other works like It, The Stand, Salem's Lot, and it kind of creates this rich tapestry that connects all of these seemingly unrelated stories into a larger shared multiverse. And these crossovers aren't just kind of like superficial nods or Easter eggs for Stephen King fans to kind of spot and go, oh cool, they're there. It's not that. They are integral. Integral? I never know how to say that word. They're important to the plot and the development of the Dark Tower universe. About 2 years ago, I saw a video by a YouTuber called Jimmy Mango.
So today I want to discuss the Dark Tower.
And he suggested a reading order for the extended universe of the Dark Tower. And after watching this video, I decided that I was going to dedicate a year of my life to reaching the Dark Tower via a route that was suggested by a random stranger on the internet. Now that I've finished the series, I can say that it was just this kind of epic and very emotional journey. If you watch some of those reviews, I cry. I cry on camera. It's embarrassing, but it happened. I'm so glad that I did that and that I took that journey and that people are still enjoying the videos that I made as they make their way across the extended universe of the Dark Tower. And I appreciate Jimmy Mango so much for his reading order, because what it did was allow me to explore Stephen King's bibliography in a really fun and kind of like meaningful way. But not all of the books felt as though they belonged, in my opinion. Some were essential, but some of them, in my opinion, not so much. And in this video, I'm going to take those 24 books that I read and kind of distill them down to what I think is the essential list that you must read if you're going to journey to the Dark Tower. I'm going to talk about the reading order that I took and how I would change it to enjoy the series even more. And as I go through each one, I'm going to basically put them into 3 columns. Absolutely essential, complementary to the series but not essential, and irrelevant. Now, if a book is in the irrelevant category, don't worry, it doesn't mean that I think it's a bad book. It just means that it had such a minimal crossover that there's no need to read it if you're only interested in reading the Dark Tower. Do you see what I'm saying? So let's get started, and I've got a little thing that I'm going to try today. I'm going to use my green screen. Hey, look, watch this. Okay, right, okay. Now, I haven't used the green screen with this setup before, so I really hope this works. Let's try it. A little bit of movie magic. How does that look? Any good? I hope so. I'm not going to know until after I've made the video. All right, anyway. Okay, so hopefully that's worked. And on the screen now, you should be able to see the 3 columns that I've set up, which are essential, complementary, and non-essential. And then along the bottom, you should be able to see all of the books that I read on my extended journey to the Dark Tower. And so let's get started and put all of these books into the relevant columns. Let's start with The Gunslinger, which serves as the entry point to the series and kind of introduces us to Roland Deschain, who is the main protagonist for the whole series. This is undoubtedly the best place to begin. It starts with this kind of iconic line, which is the man in black fled across the desert and the gunslinger followed. This is a line that will stay with you long after you finish the series. So let's put that in the essential column. Oh, can I? Oh, God, what am I doing? This is the first time I've ever done this. Okay, so let's put that in the essential column. I think many readers find The Gunslinger to be quite challenging. It has this kind of mysterious, almost dreamlike quality that can make certain parts of it feel a little bit disorienting, but all of that is intentional, I promise you. If you haven't read the book before, the ambiguity kind of adds to the atmosphere and it creates a lot of questions that will be answered later on. So I think you can think of this book kind of like a book-sized prologue. It's a short read and it is an essential foundation for the rest of the series. Stick with it. Make it to book 2 and it will be worth it. So that brings us to book 2, as I mentioned, which is The Drawing of the Three. Okay, so this is the second book in the core series and it expands the universe a lot more. This book is just completely different in tone to book 1. This is a much more, I would say, traditional narrative with some really cool moments and the introduction of one of my favorite characters in all of fiction. So I'm not going to tell you who that person is, but the scene where he gets introduced is just an excellent example of what Stephen King is capable of doing. It's just so good, the introduction to this character. So I'm going to put this in that obviously absolutely essential list. Essential. This is definitely one of my favorite books in the core series. And the great thing is that this is followed up by what is maybe my favorite Stephen King book of all time. It's definitely top 3, and that is The Stand. This is a standalone book. The Stand, standalone. There's definitely a pun in there somewhere, but I can't be bothered. Anyway, this is a great book. This is going to be our first departure from the core series as we move into the multiverse of Stephen King. And I would say that this, again, is essential to the plot of The Dark Tower. You should absolutely read this book to fully appreciate the series as a whole. So yeah, this goes also into essential. No changes yet. The next book that I read was The Eyes of the Dragon, and in the bin. Not essential, in my opinion. There are some superficial elements to this book which are present, like kind of character names being the same, but if I didn't read this book, it wouldn't have affected my enjoyment of the series at all. Also, I just didn't enjoy the book. I think that this was intended for a much younger audience. It's a fairy tale that Stephen King wrote for his daughter when she was 12 or 13 to give her something to read. So this is going to be the first one that I drop into the non-essential bucket. Next up is The Talisman. Okay, this one, I think you should probably read this book. I'm going to put this book in the complementary bucket. There is some crossover, but I think there's even more crossover in the sequel to this book, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So yeah, this one's going to go in complementary. Read it if you really want to, but it's not essential. The next book I read was The Wastelands, and this is actually a return to the series, so obviously this has to stay. This is in the core series. This is a book that I really enjoyed as well. And the same goes for Wizard and Glass, which was next. Absolutely essential. This book, just as a heads up, if you haven't read it, if you haven't read the series already, this book is probably the book that splits most people. Either you love it or you hate it. In England, we would say it's like Marmite, you know, either you love it or you hate it. The next book is Salem's Lot, which is absolutely essential. You must read this book. This is one of the most essential books to read to appreciate The Dark Tower, especially as you get into the later books. So this is so essential. Okay, followed by The Mist. I liked The Mist, and I'm gonna say that it is a lot of fun, but non-essential. Non-essential. Let's put that in non-essential. Some people would argue with that because of the phenomenon that causes The Mist, but no, there's just not enough to make it relevant. Next up is It, and this is, I'm going to say it is complementary, but not essential. However, this is one of Stephen King's not only most famous books, this is one of his best books. So even if you've seen the movies, I would highly recommend that you read this book just in its own right, but it's not essential to journey towards the Dark Tower. I loved it. Bit of a weird ending. Bit of a weird ending. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. Next up is Insomnia. Essential. Yeah, completely. You must read this before you reach the end of the Dark Tower. You must read this. A little word of warning as well, if you're thinking about picking up the audiobook. The narrator does a really great job, but the sound editor did a terrible job. There's about 30 or 40 times in this book where this insane music just plays out of nowhere. And it's like a jump scare every time it happens. It's like, it's horrific. All right. Next up is Rose Madder. Not essential. It had a really great villain in it. It's one of my favorite Stephen King villains, but it's got very little to do with the plot of The Dark Tower. So I'm going to put that in non-essential. You can skip that one if you want to. Next up is Desperation and also The Regulators. The reason I combine these two together is that they were both released on the same day. I'm not going to give any spoilers, but these books are heavily interlinked. I liked Desperation and I hated The Regulators. I don't think you need either of them though. So I'm going to drop both of these into non-essential. Sorry, guys. All right, next up is Everything's Eventual. And this is a collection of short stories. I really enjoyed it. And I think that for the purposes of The Dark Tower, there's really two stories in the collection that are essential. The first one is The Little Sisters of Eluria, which features Roland and provides a bit of his backstory. And then you've got the title story, Everything's Eventual. Those two stories, I think, are the ones which, yeah, they're essential. Would I put it in complementary? No, I'm going to put that in essential. That's essential. You should pick that up. So yeah, I think if you're interested in the journey to the Dark Tower and you only want to read what's essential, then those two short stories are the essential ones. However, you know, just read the rest of the short stories and Everything's Eventual, because there's some really good ones there. Yeah, just read it for fun. I mean, all of this is for fun, isn't it? At the end of the day, it's not, you know, it's not assigned homework. We're all doing this for fun. Anyway, next I read The Little Sisters of Eluria graphic novel. There was literally no need. It's just the same story, but in graphic novel form. You can just pick one and read it. You can read the short story from Everything's Eventual, or you can read the graphic novel of The Little Sisters of Eluria. It's the same. It's the same story. I think that was maybe a little bit of an oversight by Jimmy Mango there. I just read the same story twice. So I'm going to say not essential if you're already reading Everything's Eventual. See what I'm saying? The next book that I read was Hearts in Atlantis. This is another selection of short stories, and I do believe that this is essential, but only the first novella, which is titled Low Men in Yellow Coats. That is 100% essential. You don't have to read the rest of the short stories that are featured there. The next book that I read was Black House, and that is the sequel to The Talisman that I mentioned earlier. Pretty good book. There's some obvious crossover here, but I would say this book is complementary. It's complementary. So I'm going to put it in the middle there, complementary to the plot of The Dark Tower. And then the next book that I read was Wind Through the Keyhole. This is like a return to the core series. However, this book was published after the original series was completed. So the final book came out in 2004, and then The Wind Through the Keyhole was published in 2012. I would read it in order of publication because I didn't really enjoy this book when I read it. And I think that's because I read it kind of as advertised and how it appeared on Jimmy Mango's list. This book is advertised as book 4.5. Personally, I would say just ignore that. Just the way that I would read this book is read it after you're done with the series. It might not make sense right now, but I promise it will. Yeah, you can skip this book and then just read it afterwards. So I'm going to say essential, but don't read it in the order that it's advertised. Next up, we've got Wolves of the Calla core series again. Great book. Great book. Next up is Song of Susanna. Pretty good. And then next up is The Dark Tower. So let's just say all of these are essential, essential, and essential. Okay, so let's go over. Should I get rid of the green screen? All right, just take a look at this now, right? You can see what's in essential, what's in complementary, and what's in non-essential. And then I'm going to get rid of the green screen because I really hope that this works, by the way. I hope I'm just like sort of floating amongst this tier list because that's going to look really cool, I hope. Okay, so let's go over the essential reading order, which in my opinion, this is the order that I would read it if I was going to be reading this series for the first time. Number 1, you've got The Gunslinger. Then next, you should read The Drawing of the Three. Next, you should read The Stand. Then number 4 is The Wastelands. Then you should read Wizard and Glass, followed by Salem's Lot. Oh, great book. Insomnia. Everything's Eventual, but only The Little Sisters of Eloria and the title story, Everything's Eventual, are essential. The rest are just, like I say, a collection that you can just enjoy. Next up, I would read Hearts in Atlantis, but only the novella called Low Men in Yellow Coats. That's the only one you need. Next up, I would read... next up, I would skip The Wind Through the Keyhole, and I would go straight to Wolves of the Calla, and then Song of Susanna, followed by The Dark Tower, and then after you've had a little break, you can go back and read The Wind Through the Keyhole. Now, again, this is just my opinion. You can read it however you like. If you are planning on reading this series and you'd like some company, I actually reviewed every single one of these books, both the non-essential and the complementary, and obviously the essential as well. And if you'd like to follow along on my journey and have a little reading buddy as you make your way through this series, then you can start right up here by clicking on this video and you can watch my read along for The Gunslinger. Thanks so much for watching this video. I really appreciate it, and happy reading. Mate, I hope that green screen worked.